Hello everyone, my name is Mrs. Constantino and I will be teaching you how to annotate today. I'm going to be modeling annotations for you on the short story Liberty, which you read for your baseline. And I am going to show you how to annotate for plot today. I like to think of annotations as notes to myself on the page. It's kind of my thoughts out loud, but written down. And as a teacher, I can assess my students' critical reading by looking at their annotations to see how well they're understanding a complex text. And for students, it helps you navigate a complex text and process it. But also when you go to write, you can use your annotations to actually write your content. They kind of show you where the big ideas and important ideas are in a text and help you have something to say about those ideas. So if you remember in the story, we have our main character living in a family that is trying to move to the United States. They are in the Dominican Republic under a tyrannical ruler, and the main character is Julia. And so they are trying to flee the country because her father has opposed Trujillo, the dictator. So in the text, if you remember, we have the information about Poppy coming home, and they have the little dog, and they name the dog Liberty. And Liberty gets into a lot of trouble. So you go into the second page and we hear about Liberty and pooping in the house and things like that. And then we hear about the main character that loves Liberty. And she spends all her time with Liberty and is very defensive and wants to take care of Liberty. If you remember, she goes out because Liberty takes off and she goes to find him, and then she sees two men in the clearing. They're kind of spying on the family, and so they're making sure that the Trujillo family doesn't leave. And then it's kind of scary for the family. They realize they're being watched, okay? And then they have someone who's helping with their visas, Mr. Victor, and we have some information from him, and he treats them very well and is very good to their family. And then toward the end, we know that they are going to leave, and the main character is told that she can only take one toy, and she can't take Liberty, and she's very sad and gets very upset. And her mother says, don't worry, you're going to find Liberty when you get to the United States. And so that's like figurative. The dog's not going with them, but the main character, I think, doesn't quite understand that at this point. But figuratively, finding Liberty in the U.S. and leaving the dog behind, it'll actually bring her that security that she needs. And then at the very end, Liberty comes running after them when they're trying to leave, and she has to kind of kick them away. And then she kind of reconciles herself with the fact that Liberty, as a figurative meaning, will be waiting for her in the United States, even though she has to leave the dog there. So if you remember, that's the progression of the story. Okay. All right. So when we annotate, we would like you to annotate in a couple ways. So on the left side of the margin, you're going to be looking at the literary strategy, and we're calling that author says. So on the left side, you're going to identify the author's strategy and literary element. So for this exact one that I'm modeling to you, we are looking at, plot elements. So that's like basic exposition, complications, climax, rising action, falling action, resolution, foreshadowing, suspense, all of those things. So that's the left side. So this is where you're just kind of identifying the strategy. Now on the right side, this is where you're going to have some thinking involved. The left side, you identify it, you kind of know, I think that's part of the exposition. But on the right, this is where you have to kind of answer what the author's doing. And so we often use the author's last name in the annotations on the right side. So you're going to make notes about the why and the how of what the author does. Oops, there's a little typo there, so it should say author does. So we're looking at author. I usually try to see if I can put a verb in there of what they're doing. And then we kind of want what I think in my mind, a because thought, the why and the how. Why is the author doing it and how? So I'd write that down on my page, the author plus verb plus because. Write that down on your handout so you have record of that. Okay. So what we did for you is we've highlighted where we kind of found plot elements on the left, and then we've labeled them. And then on the right, I show you the annotation of thinking. So I just kind of want you to notice that all my annotations have the author plus verb plus because. So in this first section, this is about they're hoping that they get to leave and they get visas. And Mammy says that she really wishes that they had their visas instead of the dog. And it says, on their faces when they talked of leaving, there was a scared look I also couldn't understand. Okay, so this is the very beginning. We're picking up on conflicts and things like that. So I label this as the basic exposition Basic situation is exposition. Okay, I just labeled it, what part of the plot. And then on the right, I did the author plus the verb plus because. So Alvarez, our author, reveals the basic characters in conflict. And here's my because part. I'm giving a little more explanation. The narrator is confused about the fear her parents feel, but knows they cannot stay in the Dominican Republic. They are not safe. Okay, so just notice the format and notice that I really explain my thinking. I'm heavily already involved in the text of what the author is doing or how and why the author is doing it. Okay, so the author does part. Okay, then we get down to this part where Liberty's in trouble and he's tearing up the garden and things like that, and the mammy is so upset. So I just labeled that as a complication because we know in our plot chart, if you remember, right, stories are going to follow this plot. So we already had our exposition. We're kind of in the complication area. That's where I am right here in the plot chart. Okay, and so again, I have the author plus a verb, an action word that's kind of strong to show what she's doing, and then the because part. So Alvarez illustrates the conflict that the new puppy is a burden on Mammy instead of the blessing of freedom she is looking for. She feels hostility toward Liberty. So I see a little complication there. The mom's not sure what to think about this dog that's named what she really wants, which is that liberty and that freedom in the United States. Okay, go to the next page. The truth was, after Liberty arrived, I never played with the others. This is where she's talking about she's just with the dog all of the time. And other people, they're not as attached to Liberty as the narrator is. So I labeled this as a complication, and I was kind of specific. I said this is an external conflict because she's different from everybody else. So even in the complication, you can also say it's a form of a conflict. And then again, I don't actually have Alvarez here, but I have the importance in the verb. So it's like signifies that the narrator is different from other characters, and the because part, she doesn't see Liberty as a problem like others do. Toward the bottom part of this page, inside the clearing I stopped short. Two strange men in dark glasses were crouched behind a hedge. This is the scary part, so it's a complication. And Alvarez develops a plot complication here. Notice the author plus a verb, and then I'm going to have what she's doing with it, the how and the why, which I call the because. The narrator now understands why her family is afraid and the threat to their life and liberty is. Okay, so as we go on to page 3, we have Mr. Victor, who is trying to help them get their visas, and he ate his meals with us and stayed till late. And he was from the American Embassy, so he is trying to help them get to the United States. And so I'm going to show you now what I would label this. So it kind of feels like he's there to keep an eye on things. Something is wrong. It's not just that people are watching them, it's that they might get hurt. So I'm going to label this as foreshadowing. So what I'd like you to do, anything that I fill in now on the screen, I need you to go ahead and fill in on your paper. So handwrite it or type it if you're using an electronic format. Okay. And then here's the author does. So we have the foreshadowing, saying the foreshadowing, but what is the author doing and why? Through the characters of the puppy and Mr. Victor, Alvarez hints that if the family does not seek liberty in the U.S., they may be hurt. Okay, so that one's done for you. We have the author, we have an author plus a verb and the because again. Notice that format. And then toward the bottom of the page, she's talking about Mr. Victor from the American Embassy who is helping them and who brought them Liberty, the dog. And she says, I had the impression that God had spilled a lot of his colors when he was making American things. So I'm seeing this new setting come to life of America for the narrator, Julia, and so we're thinking of shifting settings here of where they want to be. So I'm going to label that a setting. Please go ahead and type that in. And then again, I have the author. I'm just going to just show you again. We have the author, Alvarez, depicts the verb, and then the because. Alvarez depicts the United States as a safe setting where God spilled a lot of his colors. This contrasts with the fearful setting of the Dominican Republic. So she's setting up a contrast here. Okay, and then the narrator, Julia, says, as Liberty and I sat there with the sun baking the tops of our heads, I had a sense the world as I knew was about to end. The image of the mirror glasses flashed through my head so as not to think about that. I put my arm around Liberty and bared my face in his neck. I called this foreshadowing again, and I said that Alvarez gives a clue that the future is ominous for this family. And let's give a little more of a because. So go ahead and write in on your page, liberty is what they should cling to. How about they should cling to liberty? And liberty in this sense is not the dog. It's the liberty in the United States. Okay, so if you need to pause and go ahead and write that down. And then we're going to have another complication. This is when they're getting ready to go and they said, okay, it's time to go. We got our visas, get one toy. And we have this problem, which we're going to call a complication because Julia wants to bring Liberty the dog. Okay, so type right in complication there on the left for the author, what the author is saying, the element of the plot, what's the author doing. The narrator has to physically leave Liberty, but will find Liberty in the United States. The reader understands that their family will find true freedom in leaving their current lives. Okay, notice the because. Trying to really think of the big picture. Okay, after you've written that down, you can pause the video if you need to. We're almost done. All right, so we're going to go, there's this element of plot, which is chronological order. It's chronological order is the way something is told. And so we have this chronological order of what they do. Go sit by the door. Go do this as they're waiting. So why does Alvarez do this? So I labeled it chronological order, and Alvarez emphasizes the moment of sadness of saying goodbye to their home. This creates a feeling of suspense in the reader because the events unfold in real time. The reader is waiting and waiting and watching this unfold. Do they get to go? Do they get to go? Are the bad guys going to come back? Okay. All right, go ahead and write that in. Pause it if you need to, and we're almost to the end. So now we're at the end, and we're talking. This is the part where Liberty comes and is trying to be with them and the family, and Julia has to basically kick him away, and it's really very, very sad actually. But she has to because she knows she has to choose the Liberty that's going to stick with her forever, which is the Liberty United States. So this is the climax and the falling action. Let's go ahead and write that in. So in the climax and falling action, we know that's the turning point, and for the reader's kind of understanding, it's very emotional, very intense, and then we start tending toward the resolution. We kind of can see where this is going. So Alvarez portrays the moment the narrator kicks Liberty as tense. The reader feels sad and knows the final outcome. Liberty must be left behind. Okay, and then the very last part, she says, he will beat me to the United States is what I'm thinking as I head back to the house. I'll find Liberty there. The last two sentences, all I can do is hope that when we come back, as Mammy had promised we will, my Liberty will be waiting for me here. So she knows that Liberty is the United States, and she hopes she can someday come back, but probably not. So that's the resolution. We know that they are leaving. So the struggle of leaving Liberty behind is over. Alvarez illustrates that Liberty is finally on its way to the family. The reader feels hope for the future. Okay, and that's the resolution. So after you've taken notes on those as models, we have this annotation rubric. And so basically the way it works is we can tell how well you're reading by your annotation. So a 10 or a 9, which is an A or a B, you've used developed annotations to create a clear and purposeful and thought-provoking conversation with the author. I'm really seeing you think about the text and what the author's doing. You've labeled things correctly and clearly. An 8, which is a B, the reader uses thoughtful annotations to converse with and understand what the author's trying to convey. It's still really good. It's just maybe not quite as insightful, but it's still very good. A C, it's adequate annotations. They're there. You could do a little more thinking, but I can see you understand the text and kind of what the author's doing. And then the 6, you have annotations, but they're summary where you're not really saying why and how what the author's doing. You're just summarizing the story. You're just retelling it. And then a 5 or a 0 is just like chicken scratch on the page or it's really incomplete. Okay. So if I were to highlight my annotations, I'd give myself a 10, but I'm a teacher, right? So for me, these are a model for you. But as you practice these, you're going to get up in the 9 or 10 range for what freshmen should be doing. Okay, so what I would do after that is justify why I scored my annotations, and I would write 3 sentences to do that. And I would score them because I would say things like, I identify the plot element correctly. I talk about what the author's doing. I talk about why and how the author's doing it. I include because. I also do use verbs that illustrate, use verbs that are strong to show the author's purpose. So I would justify my scoring there. So when you do your annotations later, you might give yourself a 7 and explain why. But just know this 10-9 is an A, the 8 is a B, the 7 is a C, the 6 is a D, and the 5 is an F. So, all right, so annotations, notes to yourself on the page using the author says, author does format, and these were on plot as a model. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and write some annotations for the most dangerous game, but you can use this as a model to help you.